be playing a game of letting people think, as Randy does, that they're a colony of the U.S. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. British diplomats are probably the best in the world, and so are their spies. They've been in this game a very, very long time. What came clear to me, and what I think is very obvious, even from the case of Julian Assange, is that the United Kingdom is not another vassal of the United States like Germany or France, which reluctantly goes along with orders coming from Washington. We'll see Macron making noises. He goes to see Putin in Moscow. He talks about a new security architecture for Europe. And then what happens? Her prime minister, her chancellor also says things, we're not going to send weapons, but ultimately they concede to the U.S. They let that pipeline be destroyed. Britain may have been involved in that destruction. The thing is, we don't know that for sure, but we do know that the British government, when it's lost its empire, really at the Suez crisis, when Eisenhower stepped up and stopped it, that's when they realized that they better join the United States in running a joint empire. And being as clever as they are, they're not just taking orders, in my view, from the United States. For example, in the first Gulf War, remember Margaret Thatcher said publicly to George H.W. Bush, don't go wobbly about attacking Saddam Hussein. This is the British Prime Minister talking to the President of the United States in public, telling him to grow a backbone and attack Iraq. In the second Gulf War, Germany and France voted against the authorization of the invasion down at the Security Council. That was one of the rare instances where a European so-called vassal stood up to the United States, de Gaulle pulling France out of NATO being another. But here was Germany and France voting with China and Russia not to authorize the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. Guess which permanent member, the only one, voted with the United States? Very good. Great Britain. And why? Because it was planning to join the invasion of its former colony, Iraq, all along. Blair was not Bush's poodle, as is often thought. The plans were in there to invade, and they took part. They couldn't do it alone. They needed the United States with them. I'm not saying that Britain drove that, but they had an equal part in driving that invasion, the Downing Street memo, etc. All this talk about 45 minutes and Saddam can have a missile in Trafalgar Square and all that rubbish that we were told. So coming to Julian Assange, we have to understand that this journalist is being persecuted not just by the United States, but by Great Britain. Why? Because they want him crushed. I'm talking about Whitehall. They want Assange crushed as much as the United States does for revealing crimes of state. They took an active part in the operation to arrest Julian Assange from the Ecuador embassy in London. And how did they do that? Well, it was called Operation Pelican. And this is from Declassified UK's reporting in the last few days. The Home Office had 8 staff. The Cabinet Office had 7 staff working on the secret operation to arrest Julian Assange in April 2019. The Ministry of Justice, which runs the courts, they won't say if their staff was involved in this Operation Pelican. The Foreign Office at first refused to say if its premises were used for the operation. And they lied. A junior minister from the Foreign Office lied to Parliament, saying that they weren't involved. And now it's been revealed that, yes, they had several officers working on this case from the Foreign Office. And so Ian Duncan, who was Foreign Minister for the Americas, for Europe and the Americas from 2016 to 2019, he ran this UK campaign to force Assange out of the embassy. As a minister in Parliament, he made his opposition to Assange very well known. He called Julian Assange a miserable little worm in a speech to the House of Commons. In his diaries, Duncan refers to, quote, the supposed human rights of Julian Assange. He admits in his book to arranging an article in the Daily Mail, a hit piece on Assange in the Mail that was published the day after Julian was arrested. Duncan watched the UK police pulling Julian Assange out of that embassy from his operation room in the Foreign Office. He watched a live feed, and they were wearing ties, his team, and the ties were adorned with little pictures of pelicans for Operation Pelican. And they had a drink to celebrate the arrest of Julian Assange. Afterward, Theresa May, who was the prime minister at the time, announced to the House of Commons that he'd been arrested, and there was a loud cheer. I don't know if it only came from the conservative backbenchers. Could have also been Labour. I wouldn't be surprised. Duncan, the next day or a couple of days later, flew to Ecuador to thank President Lenin Moreno, the new government of Ecuador, that lifted the political asylum of Julian Assange. He thanked him and brought a beautiful porcelain plate from the Buckingham Palace gift shop. I just want to say that the independence of the British judiciary is at stake in this case. Assange waits a decision from the High Court on his application to appeal the extradition order, as well as aspects of the lower court ruling. The Lord Chief Justice Ian Burnett is the judge who will decide whether to accept that appeal. And guess what? Alan Duncan and Judge Burnett are good friends. They had lunch together. They went to their birthday parties. So we want to know, is this an independent judiciary in Britain? I'll tell you that it's clear that the image of British justice and justice itself is on the line in the case of Julian Assange. If he's extradited, the whole world will know the British role in this tragedy and this travesty. Thank you very much.
All right, Steve Donziger is going to bring up our next speaker. Is Steve Donziger here? I don't see Steve Donziger, which means it redounds on me. Is he right here? All right, Steve Donziger needs no introduction. He will bring up our next speaker.
Hi, everybody. It's unbelievable, isn't it, that we have to be here? Can you hear me? Unbelievable that we have to be here to ask
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Research Roadshow. Today is the 19th of December, 2022, and this is part 2 of our weekly transmission on Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. As most of you know, Julian Assange is still incarcerated in the UK, and we only get updates every 2 or 3 months about his medical condition, his mental condition, his what engagement he has with his family and a couple of his closest friends and his lawyer. It is not a good situation, and I know it's Christmas time, and I appreciate, given that it's Christmas time, I appreciate you tuning in to this broadcast, but many people will not. I talked to 3 of our subscribers in Ohio and Indiana, and each of the 3 said, "Oh, I'll catch it sometime, John, but I can't participate tonight because I've got Christmas shopping to do. I've got all these other things that got to be accomplished, and besides, there are 6, in the Western world, there are 4 billion people. I'm sure some of those 4 billion, well, only, truth be told, only one person said this. Somebody else is thinking about that. There are lots of people focused on Julian Assange. I don't need to do that." Well, it's true. There were a lot of people at the rally on the 10th of December in front of the UK embassy. That was shown here in the figure to my right. There were a lot of people, and there are in every country. There are hundreds of people working on Julian's on the case to present to the judges in the UK why Julian should go free. But it was only until that friend of a friend made that comment that I don't need to worry about it. Somebody else is already working on it. Okay, and what can I do? I'm in a small town in Indiana. There's nothing I can do about Julian Assange, right? Wait just a minute. Let's examine that, because I think that is at the core of everything that's happening around us here in Atlanta, up in Columbus, Ohio, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That attitude that I just have to take care of my little garden and things will work out. Okay, I don't need to get involved in big city politics. I don't need to go to my state capital and focus on issues down there. All I have to do is think about my job, my kids. That's it. Let's go back to what the great Martin Luther King said about the effect of the individual on his or her society. Well, before I get to Dr. King, let's go back to Julian Assange's family just for a second. Now, you remember a few years ago, I think it was 2017, 2018, when we had a crisis at the border and kids were separated from their parents for a few days. And there was a huge outcry, especially from the left in the US, but from a good part of the right. Oh my gosh, I can't believe what they're doing to these kids, separating them from their mothers or fathers for 3 or 4 days. The tragedy, the outrage that shook America at this idea. And yet Julian has been separated from his kids for at least 7 years. For 7 years. Where is the outrage? A lot of people will respond, "Well, I just explained to you, John. I'm a very busy guy. I can't worry about that." Where's the connection? Okay, let's put a photo up on the screen. I want people to see Julian's kids. Okay, this is taken a few years ago, I think, three or 4 years ago. But you see that his kids are sitting there with their mother, and they're sitting outside at a bus stop near Belmarsh Prison. he has not been, I think once or twice since he's been at Belmarsh prison, he's been able to hold his kids. Okay. And one of them was at his wedding. Why should the world be outraged exactly the way they were for those kids separated at the southern U.S. border? Because it just takes one injustice to be brushed aside by the local population for injustice to flourish everywhere within that geographic area. And here we're talking about the entire world. The geographic area is not just a small town in Birmingham, Alabama. We're talking about the entire world here. Okay, I'm going to blow that up a minute. All right, so there's Julian's two kids. Let's go back to Dr. Martin Luther King, and let me get the entire quote. Should have pulled this up beforehand. I think it starts out with, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And until very recently, I'd heard about this comment. Yeah, it sounds very nice, but it really didn't sink in. The word threat did not sink into my conscience for a long, long time. I know your time is very valuable. Please bear with. Okay, here we are. And I will keep it short. I just want to drive home this point about justice, especially when we'll talk later in the week about the Department of Justice. Okay. Sorry about this, ladies and gentlemen. Share screen. Martin Luther King. Okay, here's the quote. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And he said this in 1967. The world is much smaller now. We are hyper interconnected nowadays, and it's going to get worse over the next 10 years, especially as we approach the landmark 2030. And we'll cover Agenda 21 in depth on Friday afternoon. Okay, so why is this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King important? Well, we just got off we weren't on air yet. We were recording an interview between Addie Ads and Amber Connor here at the studio. And Amber was going over some of the injustices being done to people in lower income neighborhoods, including but not limited to the takeover of a lot of properties by the big capital, okay, including BlackRock. But many people in middle class and upper class can see these injustices. They're right there on the front page, or on page 2 or 3 of the local newspaper, but they don't act because they think that, well, it's not my immediate problem. I have enough on my plate. Maybe next year I can address those issues in the lower income neighborhoods. But they don't see that BlackRock isn't just coming for the homes of the bottom 10% or the bottom 15%, because it's just like a snowball. Once it gains inertia, it grows fast, it grows bigger and bigger exponentially. BlackRock and their partners on Wall Street and the City of London have already taken over a sizable number of US farms, of inner city neighborhoods. And Amber Connor was explaining to Addie how, in minute detail, the chessboard, of Atlanta politics, and how certain groups, small groups, are being used as pawns in this great game, which Zbigniew Brzezinski called the Great Chessboard. This chessboard is part of a larger North American chessboard, which is part of the worldwide chessboard. How does this tie into the quote by Dr. Martin Luther King? If you take the time to, within 10 miles of your neighborhood, there is at least one person or one small group that's suffering a great injustice right now. If you take out 5 hours of your time, 10 hours a week of your time to help combat that injustice, you are doing a very great service as to your fellow countrymen and to people around the world. Because if the US goes down, the entire world's going down with it. If you take 10 hours of your time per week, even though it's Christmas time, to help fight that injustice, eventually it will come back to you and to your family and to your group and to your church. So I encourage everyone right now, listen to this transmission, please share it. When Addy Ads comes out with his video, his interview of Amber Connor, please share that interview and learn how the money, Catherine Austin Fitts says this all the time, learn how the money works in your neighborhood. Learn where every government-funded student at Georgia State, at Georgia Tech, at Cleveland State, Ohio State, learn how each student is getting paid with US taxpayer dollars, but doing the work of the World Economic Forum or the, what's the other one? Excuse me, I had a lapsus. ICLEI. Let me share this one right now. No one is talking about ICLEI. And you say, well, how is that possible? How could it be such a big story if no one's talking about it? But ICLEI, I've been involved with ICLEI in Europe for 12 years. It is a big deal under the guise of making better neighborhoods, walkable neighborhoods, sustainable neighborhoods. Always, always, always under the long umbrella-like arm of NATO. ICLEI recruits a lot of young people in cities across North America to do good work, to improve the cities, to feed the poor. But the people at the very top know what they're doing. Okay? And George Webb and Mark Kulak and John O'Loughlin and a few others are helping to expose how they do it. You can make a difference. Look what Julian Assange did. Just one person. Look what impact he had on changing the sensibilities of people around the world towards the necessity of free speech. That forgive me, Elon, if I'm upsetting you. There are not too many people in the world of a certain profile that are really leaning towards free speech. Because free speech means speech that could inconvenience the big plans or the significant investment of some very powerful people. And we'll get to like I said, on Friday night, we'll cover in depth Agenda 21 and how you can see Agenda 21 if you look at the investments made by certain people between 1994 and 2003. Okay. There you'll see Agenda 21 in full force. Remember, follow the money. Even I thought Agenda 21 was who knows what. Agenda 21 was really, until 2005, I couldn't care less about Agenda 21. But now it's a big, big, big issue for me. And it has everything to do, if in order to combat it, it doesn't look like we're going to get much help in the political arena, or let me say it better. You're going to the voting booth, waiting 2 more years and going to the voting booth isn't going to cut it. You have to get involved right now. You have to do like Amber Connor and 18 of her colleagues. They're actually going into Atlanta City Council and demanding to see the non-evidence, making members of the City Council and their bureaucrats prove that the World Economic Forum is not running things. Let me repeat that. This group of citizens, which formally have no standing, and they're not a stakeholder, apparently. This group of citizens is going to their elected officials and asking them to prove that the World Economic Forum is not running things. Okay? And it's taking work. It takes a lot of hard work. That's what I want to underline. Getting justice for a party that has been severely wounded by this political machinery takes work. I know it's Christmas time. I know everyone wants to be with their loved ones that they haven't seen for months or years. I get it. Please take a few hours to share these critical videos, to take the opportunity to speak with your loved ones about the most critical issues facing us. You won't be able to visit them if someone puts a 15-mile radius on your travel. And there are in Scotland, for example, 2 cities are about to impose a 15-kilometer radius for travel because of global warming, or Eclais right here on my left. Because of Eclais says petrol burning cars consume too much greenhouse gases. Therefore, you have to go by bicycle. If you want to go beyond the 15-kilometer range, you have to use a bicycle or public transport. And they're not going to stop there. It's going to get worse. Even motorcycles. You can't use your motorcycle beyond 10, then 5, and then 3 kilometers. It's going to get harder and harder and harder under the guise of sustainability. I know I've touched on 7 different topics tonight, but the key one is, if you don't fight for citizen journalism in your hometown, if you don't fight for what Julian Assange stood for and sacrificed his life for, you are going to pay, and your kids are going to pay, a much, much heavier price, a very heavy price. I guarantee it. I've lived in Europe for 32 years. I have felt firsthand on my skin the effects of World Economic Forum, of the Social Democrats, which they're pushing in Atlanta, of the United Nations, of the European Union. And I guarantee you, if you don't take the time to help solve some of the injustices in your county, it's just going to come back around to you eventually. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight at 9 o'clock, or in about an hour, we have the Zoom call that will analyze the video, what we took the rally for Julian Assange on the 10th, including Garland Nixon's interview. Great job, Garland, by the way, if you're listening. And we'll also cover some of the issues in the Eugene Yu trial and how those two things are interconnected, how the connect versus true the vote ties into the Julian Assange case. All right, everybody, thanks again. See you in about an hour on the Zoom call. And the next broadcast will be Thursday night on my next installment of Ohio, the Heart of It All. Thanks again. Have a good night, everybody.